Mr. Ray, after pushing a number of buttons and pulling on other dials, he says we're on the air in Viewpoint. Good morning, Mrs. Busby.
Well, hi.
Good morning, Mr. Ray. It's just nice to see you so busy this morning. If you had a broom, well, you could sweep the floor at the same time. Old expression. We won't go into any further this morning. Do you have anything that you'd like to offer that traveling roving reporters might have sent to you, or say anything at all?
Yes,
all right.
And this is from.
Oh, excuse me, just a minute. I should announce that this is Viewpoint. It's a program that appears every Wednesday morning at 8:15. Program of politicians, perspectives, and personalities, not necessarily in that order.
Well,
have we got that cleaned up now?
Our guest today has been a politician. He is a personality, and he does have a perspective. So he fulfills all three.
Very good on your alliteration. Go right ahead.
Okay, every once in a while you see misprints where some poor church secretary has typed up the bulletin and oops. Or, like in the Reader's Digest, for instance, they'll have things like that are just really don't work out well. And this is from a church bulletin. Remember in prayer the many who are sick of our community. Smile at someone who's hard to love. Say hell to someone who doesn't care much about you.
Well, there's that to be said. A lot of church secretaries make
Boy, I tell you, you just
there.
omit one letter and things can really be wrong, can't they?
Oh, well, that'll get us off to some sort of a start this morning. Kudos. I would say that we'd be remiss, Mrs. Busby, if we didn't mention a kudo or two or several to folks who worked so hard on the Martin Luther King breakfast Monday morning. And I guess maybe encompass everybody who was there in attendance at that very nice event.
Very.
It's not only the event which, as you know, Paul and Jim, which honors the late Martin Luther King Jr., but there's something good comes out of that besides people getting together and having a nice breakfast and a good cup of coffee here and there. We're raising money for education. And you well know how I feel about trying to aid those who are trying to find an education. So I think that's really, it was very successful, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. I thought it was very successful. The attendance was good. The speakers were excellent. And a lot of money was raised for a good cause.
Reverend Shelton, he just doesn't get enthused.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there is that. And he just hides his light under a bushel, doesn't he? Yeah. God love him.
Grant's a great guy. We all love him. I just kidding because he just does get so enthused, and it was a fun morning.
It sure was. I've got a kudo, too.
Yes, ma'am.
To none other, of course, than our good friend Larry Bompke, who, among some others, did choose to vote against legislators having the latitude to pick out in their respective districts some student to give legislative scholarships to. And I don't understand why they ever started that. What's the correlation between being a legislator and having these scholarships to hand out willy-nilly, other than, of course, to feather your own nest? Now, what is the object?
Cynic that you are.
Registered professional cynic to you, bud.
Yeah, there's that to be said. We all should have more of that. Well, you know, Larry, as I said to him in person, is a politician who served without expectation. And I think that probably says it all about Larry Bompke and what he has been to the 50th District. We're going to miss him seriously here, and he served his constituents well. Insofar as the awarding of educational scholarships, unfortunately, it became a kind of a political plum and a feather in the cap for the guy who did the awarding.
Well, of course. Of course. I mean, what else would it be for?
You cynic, you.
No, anyway, that I was reading about that in the paper, and it really made me torqued, supremely torqued.
oh, there's any given day that you can pick up the paper and get torqued about what goes down in Springfield or out the Beltway out there in Washington. No question about that. Serious matter. You know how I feel about television and what its general bill of fare. And every once in a while, you pick up a little gem. And last night, I watched the American Experience, which is always a great program. And this one, I'd seen it before, and I watched it again because it was so interesting. And the photographs were so sensational. The business about George Armstrong Custer.
Oh.
And The Last Stand, of course. And it was a well-done documentary. The really prime part of it was the great program, or the great pictures that they had on that program. Fascinating old pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, we better get to The Last Farm Boy.
Speaking of your watching the Great American Experience last night, I spent the evening with Paul Beaver reading his book.
Well, he didn't tell me about that at all. He didn't call me at all.
Reading The Last Farm Boy. And this is Paul's newest endeavor, and it was very good. And as I was telling you earlier, Paul, part of the reason I liked it so much is I remember those days too, just from a little different perspective, since I wasn't the last or first or any farm boy ever. But it was really good, and I enjoyed it immensely, I dare say.
It was nice that he took quill in hand and spent the time to recount what he remembers as a young boy. Not all of us can relate to that as well as somebody who has really experienced it. I was fortunate enough to have maternal grandparents on the farm, and I got to live with them a lot, particularly in off-school time in the summers. School would be out on Monday. By Wednesday, I'd be out at Burtonview, and I wouldn't come back until the day before school. And I learned, my granddad taught me things. Besides just being a kid running around on the farm having a good time, I was with him a lot. He probably got tired of stumbling over me a lot, I imagine. And in fact, Paul, you mentioned with horses, I can relate to that because my dad thought it'd be a good idea for me to learn how to do some of those things out there. So they put me in a plow when I was so small I had to sit forward in the seat and keep my feet in the stirrups. And the kids today can't relate to that, for riding behind a horse all day long, plowing corn. And as you suggest, your dad was more concerned about you plowing up half a row instead of... And I started that way. My granddad yelled at me several times about how to keep the stirrups down so that it didn't pop out there on you. But it's a great experience for a young man, and ladies too who grew up as young girls on the farm. Different experience. You mentioned electricity, and certainly I remember when it finally came through out there at Burtonview. But what I remember about it is that we had an old Philco radio, I think it was, battery powered, and then you mentioned the fights and the Joe Louis and all, and my granddad wanted to listen to the Joe Louis Max Schmeling fight, the second fight, you know. And by the time he got the radio all tuned up, the fight was over. Oh. He was pretty upset about that. So Paul has put the quill in the ink well, and has put together a book of his memories of as a farm boy. Kind of looks like Paul there on the back side there.
Renee Sisk, I see, did the cover. She's a clever girl, isn't she?
She did very. Originally thought about having a farm boy leaning on a truck. We have an old 50s truck of some ilk, and I probably couldn't have painted all the dents in it that time. But she felt that it was just too crowded, and I thought she really caught the mood when she showed me that. I was really happy.
It's very nice.
It's a composition of this frontispiece, or the book cover is
well, it's
really
looking
nice.
into the fall. That was my thought at the time. That's the reason the title, the times, I saw all those times change so much after the Second World War, and things I knew were going to be gone forever, and that's what I said. It's kind of felt like the last farm boy.
Kind of
there aren't as many of us as there used to be. There used to be when I went to school, Bill, you know this. Well, all kinds of farms. Middletown, where I went to school, I bet 80% of us lived on farms.
Sure.
Oh, yes.
And everybody was a
Well,
farm
particularly in the more rural, such as the Middletown area,
yeah.
the Broadway area, the Beeston area, they all had their own high schools, you
they all
know.
had it, right.
But what we remember at Lincoln High School is that the farm boys that all, and the girls too, they all bring their lunch.
Oh,
They're the only people that had lunches in school. The rest of us walked home.
Well, we had hot lunches for the first time coming out of Mill Grove. We had hot lunches, and I think they had a contract with the macaroni and cheese company. And we ate that most of the time, but we had to walk over to the grade school to get them, and that got to be kind of a hassle, so we'd take your lunch and play basketball at noon. In grade school, or high school in those days, really the two most important things for boys were basketball and FFA.
Yeah.
The FFA was very important, and you ask anybody our age in rural school, everybody was in VOAG, and you had shop. I had that one. I remember building that. My dad had a lot of lumber. He was having me build this loading chute.
You used it all.
I was
didn't you?
really enthusiastic, and the ag teacher said, "What are you going to use that for? Load elephants?" It was a little big.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't use it a lot because it couldn't move it around.
Weighed more than the
Yeah, way
animals.
more than the cattle going up. But those two things were, and the girls had FHA, future homemakers, and because the idea was that all of them would have to take care of a home someday. Well, they went into nursing. There weren't many vocations to go into.
Well, no, but you did
Nursing.
have a choice. You could be a secretary or a teacher or a nurse.
Okay,
That was
about
the-
hit it.
It's a short list.
Yeah, it was a very short list, that was kind of the way. Then I think I listed in there the jobs that were most common. When you got that senior year, today kids talk about college as a regular thing, but over there it was like, can you get on with your dad at Caterpillar? Because that was a good paying job, $50 a week
yeah,
after all.
that's big.
Still
$50
is.
a week. Can you get on with CAT, or can you get a job with the state, either in Springfield or on the roads or something? Some guys went into service. This good friend of mine just passed away, did that, went into the Navy and got hooked up. Actually, came back and worked in the nuclear lab in California, which you'd have never dreamed of when he was a high school kid at Middletown. Those three, and then people, of course, a lot of kids went back, as Bill knows this, on the farm. There was a farm, lots of people we know and I run around with to this day. That's where they were going to go. Dad was going to have the farm, and they were going to go on that, and very few thought about
Well, your brother
teaching.
chose that. Your brother chose farming.
No, my brother was an English teacher
Yeah,
at
he
Mesa
became.
City.
Really?
John.
Yeah, John. Well, that's the only one he's got.
That's right.
That's right.
Yes.
I did have two sisters. I lost a little sister right after she was born, Mary Rosalie. And, of course, Judy married Judge Coogan. And
Yeah.
Judge Coogan's probably the bigger reason I got this out, because he kidded me about this book all the time. And so guess who got the first edition? His honor.
Good for you.
I think so. That's
But my sister had to put up, believe me, with two brothers on the farm.
Yeah.
And she helped Mom and just kind of had to put up with us. Whatever we wanted us to do, we'd us to do. But it was nice having a brother to grow up with. But he did go to Illinois State, majored in English, and went to Illini Central, Mason City, and taught there his whole career. To show you how times changed, when he got out of college with that degree, he had 22 job offers. And we put them out on the kitchen table and sorted them out, and he sorted out.
Interesting.
Times have changed
Times have changed
dramatically.
again. But he was
Yes.
in English, a man teaching English. So you have a fair idea about keeping classroom decorum. He could keep it.
You refer to that in your book, too, about the teacher and the coach being supreme.
Oh, absolutely.
If they said jump, you said how high. There was just no question in your mind. And times, as you say, have changed.
Yes, they have. And fortunately, when I started teaching at Elkhart, we still had that. As Jim Anderson, God love him, he was the secretary of the board, and he had, of course, been wounded over in the Pacific. He was one tough guy, and he said, now here's the way we work it down here. Teachers run this school. If you can't run it and can't handle the kids, you don't have a job. That's real simple. The kids don't run this school. They meant it. But those things have all changed, and that's too bad because we didn't have corporal punishment. We didn't do anything like that. The kids hated it if you had to come down on them because that meant mom and dad would show up the next day apologizing for their kid. That shows you how times have changed again.
Well, not only did they bail you out of trouble, they always sided with authority. So there was no question in your mind but what authority was, in fact, authority.
That's what my father had basically said two things. What did Mr. Brandt say? That was my principal and coach. And whatever that was gospel. There was no more discussion. Or what did Mr. Elliott say? That was the ag teacher. That was the end of he didn't have time to discuss it. He was kind of that way. That story I told in there about, that really did happen about the night the kids stole gas. And, Bill, you know that happened on a lot of farms.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I can remember we had windows open. It was late July night, and then heard this coming up the gravel. We didn't have much gravel, but enough you could hear it. And Dad got up, so I got up. My grandfather had given me a .410 shotgun. I was very proud. I was probably 13, 14.
Heaven forbid you had a lethal weapon at that
lethal
age.
weapon. But believe me, my father, you even came close pointing at somebody, it'd have been gone. So he went downstairs, and I followed him down. I'm going to help him, right? And he gets that old 12 gauge. And goes outside. I'm going to help him. He's smarter than that. He doesn't want a 14-year-old kid with a gun behind him.
And
you stay in the house. So I'm looking out the window, and he went outside, and I can still hear that hot summer night. That I call it the universal sound. That Remington putting that shell in the chamber, and that car left right down. Dad just very quietly went out and hung it up. I mean, we didn't have constantly in those days. He just hung it up and went back to bed. As I said, the kids were happy because he didn't put a hole in their trunk, which most farmers did. As kind of a parting gift. They shot a hole in your trunk, which you had to explain to your father the next day, which would have been a little tough.
Well, those are certainly more innocent times. You know, Judith, there's enough difference between Paul's age and my age that horses were really much more important on the farm when I was a kid than tractors had come along by the time Paul's age were working for his dad, but horses were the main thing on the farms when I was a kid out there, and I learned how to take care of them. And of course, I was just a little shote, and the horses were awful big to me, particularly those percherons.
That's what we had. Peanuts and Baldy.
Buzz's dad farmed with horses for quite a while too, and he too with his dad, and he talks about his dad going out with the horses, and you reference the pitfalls of going to the fields, and the bees came. He must have gone over a bee's nest, and they were after the horses, and the horses very quickly left for home and left him in the field. And when they got back to the home place, Grandma Busby had her laundry on the line, and they went through that, and of course that necessitated starting over. But I'm sure you saw those things happen too with them.
Yeah, horses. We had, well, the runaway, which that's the story about my sister's adventure, but that really happened. You know, this whole thing, the whole idea of the book I'd thought about for a long time, but then my grandson, never forget Ethan, who's now junior at high school, but when he was a little kid, having a birthday party in September or October, whenever his was. Grandpa, did you ever have a birthday party? I said, nah, bottoms were always out of the roads, because mine's in March. The roads were the worst they can be in March. But he didn't know what I was talking about. I thought, maybe I ought to write this down.
Yeah.
Well, one of those kind of days, we couldn't get out our lane. We had that long lane down there. And the neighbor said, well, that's okay, I'll come down. Told Dad, said, I'll pick the kids up in the wagon, take them up, then I'll drive them on to school. So he came out in the wagon, and things were going okay. And Dad put Judy in first grade and puts me in, and we had a little brown dog came out and nipped at the horse's heels. So, you know, that's no good. And they went up, and when they came down, the outside rein snapped, and he didn't have them. So he just had one inside rein, and they started around a circle with Judy and I in the wagon. And I got out right now, and I look back, there sits Judy in this little pink snowsuit. She's sitting back there with my mom screaming, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And screaming at Dad, do something. Well, she jumped out, really did pretty nimble. Jumped out, landed, ran, just made it across in front of the horses, which today you kind of think back how close the call was. But And Dad just took a lard. Now, how many people know what a lard paddle is, Bill?
No, not today.
They stirred the lard in those big kettles when they made lard. Anyway, the horse came around, hit him right in the head, and don't have the Humane Society call, because that's all wrong. But hit him right in the head. It didn't hurt the horse that much. The horse was just wild.
Got his attention, though.
And he stumbled enough that Dad could grab the rein. Got the reins, handed them back to him, put us back in the wagon, went back doing what he was doing. I mean, now today we had to go to 3 counselors and probably have 4 days of school.
Tell me, did you...
back down the road.
How was your mail delivered when you were a kid out there?
Actually, we had to drive clear up to the mailboxes. There were 4 or 5 of them saying...
Oh, they clumped mailboxes
right
together.
out there by Lucas Chapel, which is where they actually called
Do you know the term RFD?
Uh-huh.
And you
Rural
know
Free Delivery.
Yes, there you go. Rural Free Delivery. I recall his fellow's name was Brewer, too. I don't know. I can remember what's yesterday.
I can't remember what you had for breakfast, but
the mailman out there at Burtonview, his name was Brewer, and he had a little old enclosed wagon, single horse, and he stopped at each mailbox out there in that area.
Yeah, that's the way it was for all the... like that one chapter I wrote about, we didn't know we were isolated. We were really out there. We were 9 miles exactly from the edge of Lincoln and 8.5 miles from Middletown High School. We were right on the border. My dad was, as Bill knows, was a railer. He played football for Mr. Anderson. And, and that's Anderson's gym, of course. And then I just thought that's where we'd go. Went to the grade school, and then... he came home, and I never forget that. I remember that evening he came home and said, well, we're going to consolidate. And the county did. Most of those little schools closed then, went into the town schools. I'd only been in Middletown twice in my life. We went over with the folks that we voted. And I said, well, where is that? He said, we'll find out. And it turned out to be great, because the other people I went to school with were farm kids. And Dwayne Follis, who was survived a lung operation in July, showed up in school in August, and we started basketball practice. I thought, my God, this kid, they're going to kill this kid. But when you survive that, you survive an operation. In those days, Dr. Trumpy did it for him, Bill, and saved him. And so we had, it worked out okay. But the first year I had was 8th grade year, and now that was interesting. Class and age varied from 16 to 12 in 8th grade. Yes. But that didn't,
But
this is what it was.
You talk about that being an advantage, because they'd begin the day with the 1st and 2nd graders going up to the recitation bench.
When we were at Mill Grove, right before
yes. And to be in a one-room schoolhouse was advantageous to you. And they think that more and more right along, that there was nothing wrong with that.
No, there wasn't anything wrong with that.
Seems pretty archaic, doesn't it?
Yeah. The problem we had was the other things. We had no books. I'd read every book time I was in 4th grade. They just didn't have the money. Remember, I'm going to school during the war. We had 1 bat and 1 ball, which tape helped a lot. And, of course, took our lunch. That, as I said in there, I couldn't eat. If we were on a desert island and you brought in Velveeta cheese and crackers, I'm starving for it. I can't eat that. But,
well, while we're talking about such sumptuous repast, we'll take a couple of minutes for a commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk about Velveeta cheese and crackers.